Can you sit with my
Can you
mom
sit
for a
with my
while?
mom for a
Alexander
while?
Grant didn't look up at first when he heard the voice. He was standing near the counter of Grant Coffee, listening to his manager talk about supplier contracts and delivery delays. Sir, the small voice said again, can you sit with my mom for a while? Alexander turned and looked down. I'm sorry, Alexander said politely. I'm working right now. And whatever is happening over there is a private matter. I'm not related to your family, and I don't really get involved in customers' personal situations. You should ask someone else. I can't, the girl said quickly. You see, she said softly, everyone already has someone. I can't ask a man who is already sitting with another woman. That would be rude. And the young guys won't listen to me. You're the only one standing alone. Alexander glanced around the cafe. Every table had two people, couples, friends, co-workers. No one was alone except him. Alexander crossed his arms slightly, still not convinced. Even if that's true, you're asking me to walk into a very personal situation. That man is on a date with your mother. If I sit down there, I'm interfering. That's not really my business. The girl hesitated, then said something that made him pause. You can just sit there and say you're her boyfriend, she said. And that you didn't know she was being forced to come here to meet someone. Alexander stared at her. That's your plan? She nodded. You don't have to stay long. Just a little while. 5 minutes is okay. You just have to sit next to her and talk like you know her. Then that man will leave. Men like him don't like competition. Alexander let out a slow breath. You've thought this through. She nodded again, very serious. I have. Alexander looked toward the table by the window again. The older man in the gray suit was leaning forward, talking loudly now. The woman, her mother, sat very straight, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her smile tight and polite. Why doesn't your mother just leave? Alexander asked quietly. The girl looked down at the floor for a moment. Because my grandparents are the ones who made her come. They said he's rich, and he can take care of us. They said if she says no, she's being ungrateful. Alexander's eyes moved back to the table just as the man suddenly laughed loudly. Huh, you're too modest, the man said, his voice carrying across the cafe. A pretty woman like you shouldn't be working so hard. If you marry me, you won't have to work night shifts anymore. The girl's small hand grabbed Alexander's sleeve. Look, she whispered. Please look. Alexander's gaze sharpened. The man leaned closer to Maya, smiling in a way Alexander immediately disliked. He said something else, then reached out and lightly touched her hand on the table like it already belonged to him. Maya flinched very slightly. She tried to pull her hand back politely. The man laughed again, loud and unpleasant. Don't be so shy, he said. If we get married, we'll have to get used to each other, right? Maya's smile froze on her face. Then the man asked, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, so what exactly do you do again? Nurse, right? How much do you make a month? I just want to know what kind of lifestyle adjustments you'll need to make when you move into my house. The girl's fingers tightened on Alexander's sleeve. He keeps asking her that, she whispered. He keeps asking about money. And he keeps talking like she already said yes. Alexander said nothing. He also said if they get married, she should stop working nights because he doesn't like his wife being around other men at the hospital. The girl continued quietly, and he said she should learn how he likes his house organized. Alexander's jaw tightened. And he keeps touching her hand, the girl said, her voice getting smaller. My mom is scared of being rude, so she just keeps smiling. But I can tell she's scared. I know when my mom is scared. Alexander watched as the man laughed again, that same loud, careless laugh, then said something else that made Maya look down at her coffee like she wished she could disappear into it. The girl looked up at Alexander again, her eyes shining now, but she was trying very hard not to cry. Please, she said quietly, just sit with her for a little while and say you're her boyfriend. Say you didn't know she was forced to come here. Then he'll leave. Please. I don't want my mom to marry someone who talks to her like that. Alexander didn't answer right away. He looked at the table, at the man, at Maya's polite, trapped smile, at the way her fingers kept turning the cardboard sleeve around her coffee cup over and over again because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Then he looked back down at the girl. You're asking a stranger to walk into a very uncomfortable situation. he said quietly. That's not a small thing. I know, she said. But sometimes strangers are nicer than people you know. Alexander exhaled slowly and checked his watch, more out of habit than anything else. 5 minutes? He asked. Her face lit up immediately. 5 minutes is enough. Alexander nodded once. All right. I'll sit with your mom for a few minutes. The girl's shoulders dropped in relief like she had been holding her breath this entire time. Thank you, she said. You just have to act like you like her. That's all. Alexander almost smiled. I'll do my best. He picked up a cup of coffee from the counter and started walking toward the table by the window. Behind him, the girl whispered one more thing, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. My mom is really nice, she said. She just forgot that she deserves to be treated nicely. Alexander stopped for half a second when he heard that. Then he walked the rest of the way to the table, pulled out the empty chair beside Maya, sat down like he belonged there, placed the coffee on the table, looked at her gently and said, Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. Maya Johnson turned slowly to the man who had just sat down beside her, her eyes wide with confusion. For a moment, she just stared at him. Up close, he didn't look nervous at all. He looked calm, comfortable. She began, then stopped. The older man across from her frowned. I'm sorry? And you are? The man beside her didn't even hesitate. He simply smiled and extended his hand across the table. Alexander. Nice to meet you. The older man shook his hand, but his expression had already changed. Charles Whitmore. Maya's boyfriend, Alexander added smoothly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maya felt her heart jump into her throat. Boyfriend? She turned to look at him again. Really look at him this time, trying to understand what was happening. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a small figure near the counter. Annie. Maya closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them again, she understood. Not everything, but enough. Oh, she said softly, forcing a small smile. You finished early. I did, Alexander said, placing the cup of coffee in front of her. I thought we could spend a little time together before your shift tonight. Charles looked between them, clearly trying to recalculate the situation. You didn't mention you were seeing someone, he said to Maya, his tone no longer warm. We've both been busy, Alexander answered for her. Our schedules don't always line up, but we make it work. Maya could feel the tension under the table. Her hands were still wrapped around her coffee cup, but now they were shaking slightly, Alexander noticed. Without making a big movement, he gently moved the new cup closer to her, giving her something else to focus on, something steady. Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Alexander now. So what do you do, Alexander? I work in business, Alexander said calmly. What kind of business? Charles asked. The kind that keeps me busy, Alexander replied with a small, polite smile. Charles didn't like that answer. Maya could tell. He drummed his fingers lightly on the table. And how long have you two been seeing each other? Alexander glanced at Maya, and for a split second, his eyes softened in a way that made her chest tighten. Long enough, he said. Long enough to know she deserves better than a rushed conversation over coffee with a stranger who thinks he can schedule her life like a business meeting. The air at the table changed instantly. Charles' smile disappeared. I beg your pardon? Alexander didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone stayed calm, almost friendly. But every word landed exactly where it was meant to. I'm just saying, Alexander continued. Maya is a remarkable woman, and remarkable women should never feel like they're being interviewed for a position they never applied for. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories like this to people who need them. Maya's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. No one had ever spoken for her like that before. Not in front of someone like Charles. Not like this. Charles gave a short, humorless laugh. I think this is a conversation between me and Maya. Alexander nodded slightly. It was. Until it became uncomfortable for her. Charles turned to Maya. Are you uncomfortable? Maya felt both men looking at her now, one waiting for the answer he wanted, the other waiting for the truth. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Years of being polite, of not making scenes, of trying not to disappoint people, pressed down on her shoulders. Alexander spoke again, more gently this time. You don't have to be polite if you don't want to be. Maya looked at him. There was no pressure in his face, no demand, just a quiet kind of permission she hadn't felt in a long time. She took a small breath. I think this dinner was a misunderstanding, she said carefully. You're very kind for meeting me, Mr. Whitmore, but I don't think we're looking for the same thing. Charles stared at her. Your parents seem to think otherwise. My parents want me to be safe, Maya said, but safe and happy are not always the same thing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Charles stood up slowly, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. He looked at Alexander, then at Maya, his expression tight with irritation. Well, he said, forcing a thin smile, I don't compete for attention. If the lady has already made her choice, then there's nothing more to discuss. He placed a few bills on the table. Enjoy your evening. Then he walked away, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor as he headed for the door. Maya watched him leave, her heart still pounding. When the door closed behind him, the noise of the cafe seemed to come back all at once. The espresso machine, quiet conversations, soft music. She sat there for a moment, staring at the table, then suddenly let out a long breath she felt like she had been holding for an hour. Oh my God, she whispered, covering her face with her hands. I cannot believe that just happened. Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair, giving her space. I'm guessing your daughter has something to do with this. Maya lowered her hands and looked at him. She came to you, didn't she? Alexander nodded once. She's very persuasive. Maya closed her eyes again briefly. I am equal parts grateful and absolutely horrified. You don't have to be horrified, Alexander said. She was trying to protect her mother. That's not a crime. Maya looked down at the coffee he had placed in front of her. I'm so sorry. I dragged you into something that wasn't your problem. You didn't drag me, he said. She asked. I decided. Maya looked at him again, studying his face now. Why did you say yes? Alexander thought about that question for a moment. Then he shrugged slightly. Because he was asking you how much money you make on a first meeting. Maya let out a small, surprised laugh, half embarrassed, half relieved. That was pretty bad. That was terrible. Alexander corrected gently. For a moment, they just sat there in a strange, quiet understanding. Then Maya said softly, Thank you. Really. You didn't have to do that. Alexander nodded once. You're welcome. There was a small, awkward pause. Then Maya asked, So, Alexander, who works in business, do I owe you 5 minutes of conversation now? He smiled slightly. I believe I was promised at least 5 minutes. Yes, she smiled back, the first real smile he had seen on her face that evening. Maya wrapped both hands around the warm cup of coffee, as if she was still trying to steady herself after everything that had just happened. So, Alexander, who works in business, she said with a small, tired smile. Do I owe you 5 minutes of conversation now? He smiled slightly. I believe I was promised at least 5 minutes. Yes. She let out a soft laugh. The kind that comes after stress finally releases its grip. Then I guess I should at least introduce myself properly. I'm Maya. I know, he said. Your daughter told me. Maya closed her eyes briefly and shook her head. Of course she did. I'm going to have a very serious conversation with that child. She was very worried about you, Alexander said calmly. Maya looked down at her coffee again. I know she was. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar, like two strangers standing on a bridge that had appeared out of nowhere. I should explain, Maya said finally. So you don't think I'm the kind of woman who goes on blind dates with men like that for fun? I didn't think that, Alexander said. My parents set it up, she continued. They think I work too much. That I'm tired all the time. That I'm not getting any younger. And that Annie needs stability. She gave a small, bitter smile. And in their world, stability looks like a big house and a man with money. Alexander listened without interrupting. He told them he liked me, Maya said. We met once at a church fundraiser. I was helping in the kitchen. He was one of the donors. A week later, my mother told me he wanted to take me to dinner. She said I should at least be grateful that a man like that was interested. A man like that. Alexander repeated quietly. Rich. Connected. Older. Serious. Maya stirred her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. My mother said love can grow later. But opportunities like this don't come twice. Alexander had heard sentences like that before. In different rooms, in different forms. Usually said by people who had never had to marry someone they didn't love. And what do you want? He asked. Maya looked up at him, surprised by the question. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like no one had asked her that in a very long time. She stopped, thinking, I want to come home and not feel like I owe someone my life just because they pay the bills. Alexander didn't say anything, but something in his expression softened. I know I don't have a lot, Maya continued. I'm a nurse. I work night shifts. I rent a small apartment. My car makes a weird noise every time I turn left. This is not exactly the life my parents dreamed for me. She gave a small shrug, but it's my life, and I built it myself. Alexander nodded slowly. There's a lot of dignity in that. She gave a quiet, surprised laugh. You're the first person who's ever used the word dignity to describe my life. Before Alexander could respond, a small voice appeared beside the table. Mom? They both turned. Annie stood there, looking from Maya to Alexander, trying to figure out if everything had gone well or very badly. Maya crossed her arms immediately. Annie Johnson, we are going to talk about this later. Annie looked down at the floor. Are you mad? I am very mad, Maya said, and also very grateful, and also very embarrassed. I'm feeling many things at the same time. Annie risked a small glance at Alexander. Did it work? Alexander nodded once. It worked. Annie let out a breath of relief so dramatic that both adults almost laughed. Thank you, sir, she said seriously to Alexander. I know that was weird. It was a little weird, he agreed. But you did it anyway, Annie said. So that means you're a good man. Alexander blinked once, slightly caught off guard by how simply she said it, like it was an obvious fact. Maya sighed and pulled Annie closer to the table. You cannot go up to strange men and ask them to pretend to be my boyfriend, she said. I know, Annie said. But he didn't feel like a stranger. Maya looked like she didn't know whether to scold her or hug her. I'm really sorry, Maya said to Alexander again. I know you were working. Annie said you were talking to employees when she interrupted you. It's all right, he said. I own the place. Interruptions are part of the job. Maya blinked. You own the place? Yes. She looked around the cafe slowly, then back at him. You mean you manage this location? I mean I own this location, he said. And the other 11? Maya stared at him for a few seconds, trying to process that. Annie's eyes got wide. All of them? Annie asked. All of them, Alexander confirmed. Maya let out a small breath and leaned back in her chair. So my daughter didn't just ask a random man for help, she said. She asked the owner of the entire place to pretend to be her mother's boyfriend. When you say it like that, Alexander said, it does sound slightly more dramatic. Maya covered her face with one hand. I am never coming back here. I'm going to be too embarrassed to even order coffee. I hope that's not true, Alexander said, because then I'll lose one of my more interesting customers. She lowered her hand and looked at him. Interesting? You're the only person I've met this week who didn't ask me for a business card, he said. That made her laugh again. And this time the laugh was real, warm, and unguarded. Annie looked between them and smiled quietly, like she had just solved a very complicated math problem. We should go, Maya said after a moment. I still have a shift tonight, and Annie is supposed to be at home with my parents, who are going to realize she disappeared. She stood up, and Annie quickly moved to her side. Thank you, Maya said again, looking at Alexander. For the coffee. And for everything you just did. You didn't have to. Alexander stood up too. Sometimes 5 minutes can fix more than people think. Maya held his gaze for a second, like she was trying to remember his face. Well, she said softly, I'm very glad my daughter chose your cafe to run her rescue operation. Annie waved at him. Bye, Mr. Alexander, who owns all the coffee. He smiled. Goodbye, Annie, who makes very bold plans. Maya shook her head as they started to walk away. I really am sorry. Don't be, he said. Just be careful who you let interview you for the rest of your life. Maya smiled at that, then turned and walked toward the door with Annie's hand in hers. Alexander stood there for a moment, watching them leave. Annie was talking quickly, probably explaining her entire plan. Maya listened, occasionally shaking her head, but she didn't let go of her daughter's hand. When the door closed behind them, the cafe felt strangely quiet again. One of his employees walked up beside him. "Do you know them?" she asked. Alexander looked at the empty table by the window, at the 2 cups of coffee still sitting there. "No," he said slowly, "but I have a feeling I just met someone important." And for the first time in a long time, Alexander Grant found himself hoping that a stranger would walk back into his cafe tomorrow. The next afternoon, Alexander found himself doing something he almost never did. He was distracted at work. He was standing in the upstairs office overlooking the main Grant coffee location, a tablet in his hand, while his operations director talked about quarterly numbers. Sales were up. 2 new locations were ahead of schedule. Investors were happy. Everything was running exactly the way it was supposed to. But Alexander wasn't thinking about numbers. He was thinking about a woman in a blue dress who held her coffee cup like it was the only solid thing in the room, and a little girl who negotiated like a tiny lawyer and said things like, "Sometimes strangers are nicer than people you know." "Alex?" He looked up. "Sorry. Go ahead." His director continued talking, but Alexander's attention drifted again, this time toward the large window that overlooked the cafe floor below. He told himself it was just habit. He always looked down at the cafe. He liked to observe customers, how long they stayed, what they ordered, where they liked to sit. It helped him understand why some locations made more money than others. That was what he told himself. At around 4 in the afternoon, he saw them. Maya and Annie walked into the cafe together, Annie slightly ahead, like she was leading the way. Maya looked like she had just woken up, tired eyes. Hair pulled back quickly. Simple jeans and a sweater, probably before a night shift, he guessed. Annie walked straight to the counter like she owned the place. Alexander didn't realize he was already moving until he was halfway down the stairs. By the time he reached the counter, Annie had already spotted him. "Mom," she whispered, "Leben, that's him. That's the guy." "Don't be weird." "I am not being weird," Maya whispered back. "You are the one who made me ask a stranger to pretend to be my boyfriend." "He's not a stranger anymore," Annie said. "He owns the coffee." Alexander walked up to the counter just as Maya turned around and nearly ran into him. "Oh," she said, a little startled. Hi, he said. For a second, they just stood there, both slightly unsure of what the correct social rules were after you had pretended to be someone's boyfriend the day before. Annie solved the problem by stepping forward. "We came back to pay you," she announced. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Pay me?" "For the coffee," Annie said. "And for the acting." Maya closed her eyes briefly. "I told her we already paid for the coffee, but not for the acting," Annie insisted. Alexander crouched down slightly so he was at Annie's eye level. "The acting was free," he said, "but I appreciate that you're an honest businesswoman." Annie nodded seriously. "My mom says we always pay our debts." Alexander glanced up at Maya. "That's a good rule." Maya gave a small shrug. "It's the only way I know how to live." "Well," Alexander said, standing up again, "in that case, you can repay me by sitting down and having coffee with me for a few minutes. No acting required this time." Maya hesitated. "I don't want to interrupt your work again." "You're not interrupting," he said. "I'm inviting." She studied his face for a moment, like she was trying to figure out if there was a hidden cost to this invitation. Annie answered for her. "We accept," she said, already walking toward the same table by the window from the day before. Maya sighed. "I see I no longer make decisions in my own life." Alexander smiled slightly. "You still do." But she's very persuasive. They sat down at the table. This time, no one was pretending. No one was performing. It was strangely more nerve-wracking than the day before. "So," Maya said, wrapping her hands around a new cup of coffee, "do you always rescue women from terrible blind dates? Or was I a special case?" "You were a special case," he said. "I don't usually take relationship advice from children." Annie nodded. "You should, though. We're very smart." "I'm starting to realize that," he said. Maya looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, "I meant what I said yesterday. Thank you." That situation, it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was starting to feel like my life was being negotiated like a contract. Alexander nodded slowly. I've been in rooms like that. Rooms where people talk about your future like you're not sitting there. She looked at him surprised. You have? Yes, he said. Just in different kinds of rooms. Annie was stirring too much sugar into her hot chocolate and only half listening. But her eyes kept moving from Alexander to her mom and back again like she was watching a tennis match she really wanted someone to win. My parents are going to be very angry when they find out I said no, Maya said after a moment. They think I threw away a perfect opportunity. Do you think it was a perfect opportunity? Alexander asked. Maya looked down at her cup. I think it was a very comfortable cage. Alexander didn't respond right away, but something in his expression changed. Like that sentence meant more to him than she realized. Annie suddenly spoke. Mom cried last night, she said matter-of-factly. Maya froze. Annie. What? Annie said. You did. Maya looked embarrassed. It was just a long day. Annie looked at Alexander and explained. She cries when she's really tired and trying to be strong at the same time. Alexander felt something twist in his chest again, the same feeling he had yesterday when Annie said her mom forgot she deserved to be treated nicely. That's a heavy job, he said quietly. Being strong all the time. Maya looked at him, and for a moment, she didn't look away. Yeah, she said softly. It is. There was a pause, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of pause where two people were starting to see each other clearly, not as strangers, not as roles, but as people who were both carrying more than they said out loud. Annie suddenly smiled, very satisfied, and took a big sip of her hot chocolate. Alexander noticed. Why do I feel like you're planning something again? He asked her. I'm not planning, Annie said. I'm just watching. Watching what? She pointed lightly between him and her mom. This. Alexander didn't realize when exactly it started to become a habit. At first, it was just coincidence. Maya's night shifts at St. Mary's Hospital usually started at 7 in the evening, and on the days she worked, she often came to Grant Coffee around 5. She said it was because the coffee was better than the hospital vending machine, but Alexander suspected it was also because it was the only quiet hour in her day. Annie would sit with her homework, her small backpack on the chair, pencils spread across the table like she was setting up an office. Maya would drink her coffee slowly, like she was trying to store energy for the long night ahead. And Alexander, somehow, always seemed to be checking this location around that time. One evening, Annie was doing math homework, frowning so hard at a page of numbers that she looked personally offended by them. I hate fractions, she announced. Alexander, who had just walked over to their table with 3 cups, 1 coffee, 1 hot chocolate, and 1 black coffee for himself, said, Fractions are just numbers that haven't made up their minds yet. Annie looked at him. That doesn't make it better. It makes it honest, he said, sitting down. Maya looked up from her coffee. Don't you have other stores to run? I do, he said, but this one has the most difficult math problems. I feel needed here. Annie pushed her worksheet toward him. If you're so rich, why don't you just buy fractions and make them go away? Maya tried not to laugh. Annie. Alexander studied the paper very seriously. I've tried. Unfortunately, fractions are not for sale. Annie sighed dramatically. Then what good is being rich? Alexander pretended to think about it. Good coffee, comfortable chairs, and occasionally helping someone with math. Annie considered that. Okay, you can stay. Maya shook her head, smiling into her cup. I'm sorry. She invites you like this is her office. I don't mind, he said. It's nice being invited somewhere without a contract. Maya looked at him over the rim of her cup. Is that what most people invite you for? Usually, he said simply. There was no self-pity in his voice, just a quiet statement of fact. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she changed the subject. You never told me what kind of business you actually run, she said. Alexander helped Annie circle the correct answer on her worksheet before answering. Investment. Retail. A few other things. That sounds very vague, Maya said. That's because it's very boring, he replied. Annie looked up. Do you have kids? The question was so direct that Maya almost choked on her coffee. Annie, you cannot just ask people that. It's okay, Alexander said. He paused for a second, then nodded. Yes, I have a son, Lucas. He's 10. Where is he? Annie asked. With a nanny right now, Alexander said, and a math tutor he doesn't like. Does he hate fractions too? Annie asked. Yes, Alexander said. Very much. Annie nodded like this confirmed something important. Then I think we would be friends. Maya watched the way Alexander talked about his son. His voice changed slightly softer, less controlled, more human. Are you married? Annie asked next. Annie, Maya said again, warning in her voice. Alexander didn't seem offended. He just looked down at his coffee for a moment before answering. No, not anymore. Maya noticed the way he said it. Not divorced, not single, not anymore. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He nodded once. Me too. They sat in silence for a moment. Annie, sensing something serious had entered the conversation, went back to her fractions. My husband left when Annie was a baby, Maya said after a while. At first he just worked a lot. Then he worked somewhere else. Then he lived somewhere else. Then he had another family somewhere else. Alexander didn't interrupt. He just listened. It was just me and her after that, Maya continued. My parents helped, but they also never let me forget that I chose the wrong man. So now they want to choose the next one for me. And you don't want them to, Alexander said. Maya shook her head. I don't want to belong to someone who thinks he rescued me. Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair, looking at her carefully. You don't look like someone who needs rescuing. She gave a small, tired smile. I'm just someone who gets very tired sometimes. Annie suddenly spoke again without looking up from her homework. She cries in the kitchen when she thinks I'm asleep, she said. Maya closed her eyes. Annie. What? Annie said. You do. Maya looked embarrassed, but Alexander didn't look uncomfortable. He just said quietly, being strong all the time is a very heavy job. Maya looked at him again, and this time there was something different in her eyes. Not just gratitude, not just politeness, recognition. Yes, she said softly, it is. Annie finished her last math problem and pushed the paper toward Alexander proudly. I survived fractions. I'm very proud of you, he said. She grinned. You're very helpful for a rich guy. Maya stood up and checked the time. I have to go. Night shift. Annie started packing her pencils. Alexander stood too. Do you always work nights? He asked. 3 nights a week, Maya said. Sometimes 4 if someone is sick or quits or disappears. That sounds exhausting. It is, she said. But it pays the rent. There was that word again. Rent, bills, night shifts. Words from a world Alexander didn't live in anymore, but a world he remembered very well. They walked toward the door together. Outside, the Boston evening was turning cold, the streetlights just starting to come on. Annie suddenly grabbed Alexander's hand before Maya could stop her. Thank you for helping my mom, she said. Alexander looked down at her small hand in his. Your mom didn't need my help, he said gently. She just needed someone to sit with her for a few minutes. Annie nodded. Yeah, but you stayed longer. Alexander looked up at Maya. She was watching him in a way that made him feel like that sentence meant more than Annie understood. I should go, Maya said softly. He nodded. Drive safe. Or walk safe. Or however you get there. She smiled a little. Bus. Very glamorous. He almost offered to drive them. The offer rose to his mouth and stopped. He didn't want to insult her pride. Good night, Maya. Good night, Alexander. Good night, Annie, who hates fractions. She grinned. Good night, Alexander, who pretends to be boyfriends. Maya covered her face with one hand as they walked away. Alexander stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching them go, Annie talking nonstop, Maya listening, tired but smiling. For the first time in years, Alexander realized he was looking forward to tomorrow, not because of a meeting, or a deal, or a number on a report, but because around 5 in the afternoon, a nurse and a little girl would probably walk into his cafe again, and for a few minutes, he wouldn't feel like the richest man in the room. He would just feel like a man sitting at a table where he was actually wanted. A week passed, and without anyone officially saying it out loud, a quiet routine began to form. Around 5 in the afternoon, Maya and Annie would walk into Grant Coffee. Annie would go straight to their table by the window. Maya would order a medium coffee, half cream, no sugar, and somehow, Within a few minutes, Alexander would appear sometimes with a laptop, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes with no excuse at all. One evening, Maya noticed something different. When she and Annie walked in, two employees behind the counter immediately straightened up. "Good afternoon, Miss Johnson," one of them said politely. "Your usual?" Maya blinked. "Oh yes, thank you." Annie leaned closer to her and whispered, "See? VIP. I am not a VIP." Maya whispered back, "Do not start acting weird." "I'm not acting weird," Annie said. "I'm observing." They walked to the table by the window, and right on time, Alexander walked over with 3 drinks. "You're becoming predictable," Maya said as he sat down. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a businessman," he replied. "We like predictable. Predictable makes money." Annie took her hot chocolate. "Predictable also means you like us," she said. Alexander looked at her. "You negotiate like a lawyer and observe like a scientist. That's a dangerous combination." "I know," Annie said calmly. Maya shook her head. "I don't know where she gets this from." Alexander and Annie both looked at Maya at the same time. Maya sighed. "Unfortunately, that is fair." For a few minutes, Annie worked on spelling homework while Maya and Alexander talked about small things. Boston traffic, the weather getting colder, how the hospital cafeteria had terrible coffee, which Annie said was a crime in a city with this many coffee shops. Then Maya's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face changed immediately. The warmth disappeared. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. "Everything okay?" Alexander asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "My mother. Is she okay?" he asked. "She's fine," Maya said. "She just wants to know if I've thought more about Mr. Whitmore." Annie didn't look up from her homework. "Tell Grandma I vote no." Maya sighed and typed a short reply, then put the phone face down on the table like she didn't want it looking at her anymore. "They really want you to marry him," Alexander said. "They really want me to be safe," Maya corrected gently. In their generation, safety meant marrying someone who could pay the bills even if he didn't love you, or even if you didn't love him. "And what does safety mean to you?" Alexander asked. Maya thought about it for a long moment. "Safety," she said slowly, "is being able to fall asleep without worrying that someone can take your home away, your job away, or your child away." Alexander didn't respond right away. That answer was not theoretical. That answer came from someone who had lived close to losing things. "My dad keeps saying I'm making life harder than it needs to be," Maya continued quietly. "He says I'm too proud. He says a smart woman accepts help when it comes." "And do you think marrying someone you don't love is help?" Alexander asked. Maya looked at him. "I think it's a trade." The word hung between them. Across the table, Annie erased something so hard on her paper that the pencil almost tore the page. "Annie," Maya said softly, "don't press so hard." "I'm pretending this is Mr. Whitmore's face," Annie muttered. Maya closed her eyes. "Annie, what?" "I'm expressing my feelings in a healthy way." Alexander tried very hard not to laugh and failed. Maya looked at him, and for a moment, they both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh shared between two tired adults who rarely had permission to find things funny. Then Annie suddenly looked up at Alexander. "Can your son come here sometime?" Alexander blinked. "Lucas?" "Yeah," Annie said. "If he hates fractions too, we should suffer together." Alexander smiled slightly. "I think that can be arranged." Maya looked at him. "You don't have to do that. It's not a business meeting," he said. "It's just 2 kids who both hate fractions." She studied his face for a moment. "You're not used to normal friendships, are you?" He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Not really. Most people are either my employees, my competitors, or people who want something from me." "And what do I want?" Maya asked quietly. He looked at her for a moment. "Coffee, time, and a place to sit before your night shift." She held his gaze for a second, then looked down at her cup, but she was smiling a little. At 6:30, Maya stood up and started putting on her coat. Annie packed her homework slowly, like she didn't want to leave yet. "You work too much," Annie told her. "I know," Maya said. "You're always tired," Annie said. "I know," Maya repeated. Annie looked at Alexander. "Can rich people get less tired than normal people?" Alexander thought about that question seriously. "No," he said, "but they can sometimes buy time." And time helps with tired. Annie nodded like that was important information. They walked toward the door together again. It was becoming a habit, those last few steps to the door. The cold air waiting outside. The quiet moment before everyone went back to their separate lives. "Alexander?" Maya said as she put on her gloves. "Yes? Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Sitting with us, helping Annie with homework, listening to me complain about my life. You don't owe us anything." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "When my wife died," he said quietly, "people filled my house for weeks. Flowers, food, phone calls, advice. And then, after a while, they all went back to their lives, which is normal. That's how life works." Maya didn't interrupt, but the hardest part wasn't the funeral, he continued. "It was the evenings after everyone stopped coming, when the house was quiet and my son was asleep and there was no one to sit across the table from anymore." Maya felt her chest tighten slightly. "So," Alexander said, "I think I'm sitting here because I know what it feels like when a chair across from you is empty for too long." Maya looked at him, really looked at him, like she was seeing not the owner of the cafe, not the calm businessman, but the man who sat alone at a table after everyone else went home. "I'm glad," she said softly, "that the chair isn't empty anymore." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Annie, already halfway out the door, turned around and said, "Are you coming or are you two going to stare at each other like a movie?" Maya blinked and grabbed Annie's hand. "We're coming." Alexander opened the door for them, and cold Boston air rushed in. As Maya stepped outside, she turned back to him and said quietly, "Thank you for sitting with us, Alexander." He nodded once. "Anytime." But as he watched them walk away again, Annie talking, Maya listening, the streetlights reflecting on the sidewalk, Alexander realized this was no longer just about 5 minutes. Somewhere between fractions, homework, night shifts, and cups of coffee, he had started to rearrange his day around a small table by the window. And that was not a small change in a man's life. Lucas did not want to come to the cafe. "I don't see why I have to go," he said from the back seat, arms crossed. "You said we were just getting coffee, not doing a social experiment." Alexander kept his eyes on the road, hiding a small smile. "You need to get out of the house. You've been staring at screens all weekend." "I was building a city," Lucas said. "That's not staring at screens. That's urban planning." "Of course it is," Alexander said. "You can bring your urban planning ideas with you. There will be hot chocolate." Lucas considered this. "With whipped cream?" "Yes. And no talking to weird adults?" "I can't promise that," Alexander said. Lucas sighed the deep, dramatic sigh of a 10-year-old who believed life was very difficult. "Fine. But I'm bringing my book so I don't have to talk." When they walked into Grant Coffee, Annie spotted them immediately. She slid off her chair so fast her backpack almost fell. "You brought him," she said, pointing at Lucas like he was a celebrity. Lucas stopped walking and looked at Annie. Annie looked at Lucas. They stared at each other for a few seconds like two small animals trying to decide if the other one was friendly. "You hate fractions?" Annie asked. "Yes," Lucas said. "Me too," Annie replied. They shook hands like two business partners closing a deal. Maya looked at Alexander and shook her head slowly. "I feel like something very serious just happened." "It did," Alexander said. "A strategic alliance." The kids sat at the end of the table with homework and hot chocolate, already talking about school, teachers, and which subjects were useless, and which ones were acceptable. Maya watched them for a moment, then looked at Alexander. "He seems like a good kid." "He is," Alexander said. "He just misses his mom and pretends he doesn't." Maya nodded slowly. "Annie does the opposite. She misses her dad and talks about it all the time so it doesn't hurt as much." Alexander turned to her. "Where is her father?" Maya looked down at her coffee. "He didn't die. He just left." Which is a different kind of disappearing. Alexander didn't say anything, but his expression changed. "Sometimes I think that's harder to explain to a child," Maya continued quietly. "If someone dies, you can say they didn't have a choice. But if someone leaves, then the child thinks maybe they just weren't worth staying for." Alexander looked toward the end of the table where Annie and Lucas were now arguing about whether math or spelling was more useless in real life. "She seems very sure of herself," he said. She is, Maya said. But she also watches everything. She knows when I'm worried even when I don't say anything. Alexander nodded. Lucas is like that too. Kids who grow up a little too fast usually are. Maya looked at him. You didn't expect your life to turn out like this, did you? He smiled slightly. No, I expected a lot of things. This wasn't one of them. What did you expect? She asked. I expected my wife to still be alive, he said simply. Maya's chest tightened. I'm sorry. He was supposed to grow up with two parents, Alexander continued, nodding slightly toward Lucas. I was supposed to grow old with someone who knew me before any of this. He gestured vaguely, meaning the money, the company, the buildings, the life people saw from the outside. Instead, he sat in a coffee shop in the late afternoon, helping two kids with homework and talking to a nurse who worked night shifts and drank her coffee slowly like she was saving strength for later. And somehow, this felt more real than most of the rooms he spent his time in. At the end of the table, Annie suddenly looked up. We have a question. That sounds dangerous, Maya said. Lucas spoke this time. We want to know how you two met. Maya almost choked on her coffee. Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching them carefully. Annie answered for them. He pretended to be her boyfriend so she didn't have to marry a creepy old guy. Lucas blinked. Then he looked at his father. That is the weirdest thing you've ever done. Alexander nodded. That's fair. Maya covered her face with one hand, laughing and groaning at the same time. I cannot believe this is my life. Lucas looked at Maya. Are you actually his girlfriend now? Maya nearly dropped her cup. No. No. We are not, no. He was just helping me. That's all. Lucas looked at his father again. Do you want her to be your girlfriend? Lucas, Alexander said calmly. We don't ask questions like that. I'm just trying to understand the situation, Lucas said. You always say I should analyze situations logically. Annie pointed at Lucas. I like him. Maya looked like she wanted the floor to open and swallow her. Alexander decided to rescue her this time. The situation, he said, is that your mother's... He stopped, then corrected himself. That Maya and I are friends. Lucas considered this. Annie considered this. The two kids then exchanged a look that made both adults slightly nervous. That's how it starts, Annie said. That is not helping, Maya said. They all laughed, and the conversation moved on, but something had shifted. The word friends now sat at the table with them, and it felt both safe and dangerous at the same time. Later, when the kids went to the counter to get more napkins and accidentally looked at a display of cookies for too long, Maya leaned slightly closer to Alexander. You know they're going to try to set us up, right? She said quietly. They already are, he replied. Is that going to be a problem? She asked. Alexander looked at her for a long moment before answering. I don't know yet. Maya nodded slowly. That's an honest answer. He looked toward the counter where Annie was explaining something with very big hand gestures while Lucas listened like this was the most interesting conversation he'd had all week. I think, Alexander said quietly, that they saw something before we did. Maya followed his gaze. Annie was laughing now, Lucas trying not to smile but failing. What do you think they saw? Maya asked. Alexander didn't answer right away. I think, he said finally, they saw two people who were both very tired of doing everything alone. Maya felt that sentence somewhere deep in her chest. Outside, the sun was going down, and the cafe lights reflected on the window beside their table. For a moment, the four of them looked like a family reflected in the glass, two adults talking quietly, two kids arguing over cookies, 4 cups on the table, 4 chairs filled. Maya saw it too. She saw the reflection and quickly looked away, like it was something she wasn't allowed to want. But Annie saw it, and Annie smiled. When Maya got home that night, her mother was waiting at the kitchen table. That was never a good sign. Evelyn Johnson sat with her hands folded, a cup of untouched tea in front of her, the overhead kitchen light casting a yellow glow over the small apartment. Robert Johnson stood by the sink, pretending to read something on his phone, which meant he was listening to every word. Annie immediately slowed down when she saw them. She looked up at her mom, then quietly slipped off her backpack and walked to her room without being told. Maya took off her coat slowly. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Evelyn didn't smile. How was coffee? Maya paused for half a second. It was fine. With him? Evelyn asked. Maya put her keys on the table. Yes, with him. Robert spoke without looking up. Charles called. Maya closed her eyes briefly. Of course he did. Evelyn finally said what she had clearly been waiting to say. He said you embarrassed him. He said you brought another man to the date and made him look like a fool in a public place. Maya pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. She was too tired to stand through this conversation. I didn't bring another man, she said calmly. He showed up because Annie asked him to help. Evelyn's eyes widened. You let your child interfere in something this important? Something this important? Maya repeated quietly. Mom, you were trying to marry me off like I was a business deal. We were trying to secure your future. Evelyn snapped. Do you know how hard your life is? Do you know how tired you look every day? Do you know what people say about a woman your age still working night shifts and raising a child alone? Yes, Maya said softly. I know exactly how hard my life is. I live it. Robert finally turned around. Charles is a good man, he said. He has money. He has a house. He said he would put Annie in a private school. And what would I have to give him in return, Maya asked. Evelyn frowned. What kind of question is that? A serious one, Maya said. Because from what I heard at that table, he wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for someone to fit into his life, his house, his rules. That's called marriage, Evelyn said sharply. Marriage is compromise. No, Maya said quietly. Marriage is not supposed to feel like you're signing a contract you can't escape from. The kitchen went quiet. Evelyn leaned forward. So instead, you're going to what? Keep working yourself to death? Keep riding the bus to night shifts? Keep worrying about rent every month? That's your plan? Maya didn't answer right away. Then she said, I would rather be tired than trapped. Robert shook his head slowly. You're too proud, and you're too willing to give me away to the first rich man who asks, Maya replied, not raising her voice, which somehow made it hit harder. Evelyn stood up abruptly. Charles said the man you brought to the cafe was rude to him. He wasn't rude, Maya said. He just didn't treat Charles like he was more important than everyone else. And who is this man? Robert asked. What does he do? Maya hesitated. He owns the cafe. The cafe? Evelyn repeated. He's a coffee shop manager? He owns the whole chain, Maya said quietly. Both of her parents froze. The whole chain? Robert asked. Yes. They exchanged a look. Maya knew that look. She had seen it her whole life. The look people gave when money entered the conversation. Evelyn sat back down slowly. So he's rich. Yes, Maya said. And he's interested in you? Evelyn asked carefully. Maya shook her head. He's my friend. Evelyn gave a small, knowing smile. Men like that don't spend time drinking coffee with single mothers unless they're interested. Maya felt something in her chest tighten. He's kind to Annie. He listens when I talk. He treats me like I'm equal. That's all. Robert crossed his arms. And what does he want in return? The question landed heavy in the room. Maya thought about Alexander sitting at the table helping Annie with fractions, about the way he listened when she talked about night shifts, about the way he said the hardest part of losing his wife was the empty chair across the table. He wants somewhere to sit, Maya said finally. Her parents looked confused. What does that even mean? Evelyn asked. Maya looked down at the table. It means he's lonely too. That night, after everyone went to bed, Maya stood alone in the small kitchen, drinking a glass of water in the dark. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. She thought about the reflection in the cafe window earlier that evening, 4 people at a table, looking like a family. It had scared her how much she wanted that to be real. A soft hee came from behind her. Annie stood in the hallway in her pajamas, holding her stuffed animal. Are you in trouble? Annie asked. Maya smiled a little. No, just talking to Grandma and Grandpa. Annie walked into the kitchen and leaned against her. Do you like him? Maya didn't pretend not to understand. Annie, it's a yes or no question, Annie said. Maya looked down at her daughter. Yes, she said quietly. I like him. Annie nodded like she had just confirmed a scientific theory. Good. He likes you too. You don't know that, Maya said. Annie shrugged. I know. How? Maya asked. Because when you talk, he looks at you like you're the only person in the room, Annie said. And when you're tired, he looks worried. And when you laugh, he looks surprised, like he did something right. Maya felt her eyes sting a little. You notice a lot for a kid. I have to, Annie said simply. It's just us, so I have to make sure you're okay. Maya pulled her into a hug and held her tightly. You don't have to take care of me, Maya whispered. I know, Annie said, but I want to. They stood there in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Finally, Annie said into her shoulder, Are you scared? Maya closed her eyes. Yes. Of what? Annie asked. Maya thought for a long moment before answering. I'm scared that if I let myself be happy, she said softly, something will come and take it away. Annie pulled back and looked at her very seriously. Grandma says you can't build a life always waiting for the bad thing to happen. Maya smiled a little through her tears. Your grandma says a lot of things. Annie took her hand. I think this time she's right. Maya looked down at her daughter, then out the small kitchen window into the dark Boston night. Somewhere across the city, a man who owned buildings and companies and more money than she could imagine was probably sitting at a large table in a big quiet house with one empty chair across from him. And for the first time in many years, Maya realized she wasn't just afraid of being poor, or tired, or alone. She was afraid of wanting something more, and she was even more afraid of what it would cost if she reached for it. The next day, Maya almost didn't go to the cafe. She finished a long night shift at St. Mary's Hospital just after 6 in the morning. By the time she got home, the sun was coming up, and her feet hurt so badly she had to sit on the edge of the bed for a full minute before she could even take off her shoes. She slept for a few hours, but it wasn't real sleep. It was the kind of sleep where your body shuts down but your mind keeps running bills. Her parents' disappointed faces, Annie's voice asking, Do you like him? And Alexander's quiet voice saying, I think I'm sitting here because I know what it feels like when a chair across from you is empty for too long. When she woke up, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. She lay there staring at the ceiling, already knowing she should get up, make dinner, check Annie's homework, maybe pick up an extra shift next week. Instead, she found herself thinking about a small table by the window and a man who drank black coffee and spoke very carefully. Like every word had to be honest or he wouldn't say it at all. Mama? Annie's voice came from the doorway. Are we going to the coffee place today? Maya sat up slowly. Do you want to go? Annie shrugged, trying to look casual. I mean, I have homework, and they have tables, and hot chocolate. So, maybe. Maya studied her daughter for a moment. Annie was trying very hard to look like this was about homework and hot chocolate, and not about a man named Alexander. Okay, Maya said. We'll go for a little while. Annie tried not to smile too big. Okay. When they walked into Grant Coffee, the bell above the door rang softly. The late afternoon crowd was there, people with laptops, a couple on a date, 2 older men playing chess near the back. Alexander was not at their table. Maya told herself she didn't care. He had a life, a business, meetings, important people to talk to. He couldn't just appear every time she walked in. Still, when she ordered her coffee and turned toward the window table, she felt a small, quiet disappointment settle somewhere in her chest. They sat down. Annie took out her homework. Maya wrapped her hands around her coffee and stared out the window at the Boston street, people walking past in coats, cars stopping at the light, life moving forward like it always did. You look tired, a voice said beside her. She turned quickly. Alexander stood there, holding his usual black coffee. I am tired, she said, but she was smiling. Night shift? He asked, sitting down. She nodded. Emergency room was full. Flu season. Annie looked up. I did not die from fractions today, she announced. I'm very proud of you, Alexander said. Lucas also survived fractions. Barely. Annie nodded seriously. We are both very brave. Maya watched the two of them talk, and something warm spread slowly through her chest. It felt dangerous, that feeling. Like standing too close to the edge of something high and beautiful. My parents know about you, Maya said suddenly. Alexander looked at her. That sounds serious. It is, she said. Mr. Whitmore called them. He told them I humiliated him in public by bringing another man. Alexander didn't look surprised. I imagine he's not used to hearing no. He's not, Maya said. My parents asked what you do. I told them you own the cafe. And? Alexander asked. They asked how much money you have, Maya said with a small, tired smile. Alexander leaned back slightly. That sounds about right. They think if you're rich and interested, then I should say yes very quickly, before you change your mind, Maya said. Like I'm a limited time offer. Alexander's expression darkened slightly. And what do you think? Maya looked down at her coffee. I think I don't want to be chosen because I'm convenient, or because I look like a good person to rescue. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't rescue people, Maya. She looked up at him. No? No, he said. Rescuing implies you're helpless. You're not helpless. You're just carrying a lot by yourself. She didn't know what to say to that. At the end of the table, Annie was drawing something instead of doing homework now. Alexander leaned over slightly. What are you drawing? A seating chart, Annie said. A seating chart for what? Maya asked. For Thanksgiving, Annie said. If we combine families. Maya nearly spilled her coffee. Annie. What? Annie said. I'm planning ahead. That's what successful people do. Alexander pressed his lips together, clearly trying not to laugh. That is very forward planning. Annie held up the paper. See? This is Mom. This is me. This is you. This is Lucas. We sit here. And no one is allowed to bring Mr. Whitmore. Maya covered her face with both hands. I am so sorry. I don't know where she learns this. Alexander looked at the drawing carefully like it was a real architectural plan. I appreciate that you gave me a seat, he told Annie. You're welcome, Annie said. You saved my mom, so you can come to Thanksgiving. Maya lowered her hands and looked at him, embarrassed but also something else, something softer. You didn't save me, she said quietly. Alexander met her eyes. No, he said, but I'm very glad Annie asked me to sit down that day. For a moment, then people talking, cups clinking, the espresso machine hissing, but at their table, there was a small, quiet world forming, one conversation at a time. Maya, Alexander said after a while, his voice more serious now. Can I ask you something? She nodded. If your parents weren't in the picture, he said, and money wasn't part of the decision, and you weren't worried about what people would say, what would you choose for your life? Maya didn't answer right away. She looked at Annie, who was now explaining the Thanksgiving seating chart like it was a military strategy. She looked back at Alexander, at the man who owned half the buildings on the street but still showed up at 5 in the afternoon to help a little girl with math. I would choose this, she said quietly. Alexander frowned slightly. This table, she said, this hour before work, Annie doing homework, someone to talk to who doesn't look at me like I'm a problem to solve. Alexander didn't speak. I don't need a big house, Maya continued softly. I don't need fancy things. I just don't want to do everything alone anymore. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and honest. At the end of the table, Annie looked up and said, as if she had been listening to every word, See? I told you. This is how it starts. Maya shook her head, but she was smiling. Alexander looked at both of them, this tired, strong woman and this fearless child, and realized something that would have terrified him a few months ago. He didn't just enjoy sitting at this table anymore. He needed it. The first sign that something was about to go wrong came on a Tuesday. Alexander was in a conference room on the 32nd floor of Grant Group's headquarters, staring at a screen full of numbers while 3 men in suits argued about expansion costs. Normally, this was a world he controlled easily. Numbers made sense. Contracts made sense. Risk made sense. Feelings did not. Alexander, we need your decision, one of the board members said. If we acquire the Chicago properties now, we can double revenue in 5 years. Alexander nodded slowly. But his mind wasn't on Chicago. It was on a small table by a window, and a nurse who said she would choose this if no one was pressuring her. We'll review the numbers again next week, he said. I'm not making a decision today. The men exchanged glances. Alexander Grant always made decisions quickly. That was one of the reasons he was Alexander Grant. After the meeting, his PR director, Helen Brooks, walked into his office holding a tablet. We have a situation, she said. Alexander looked up. What kind of situation? The kind that ends up in newspapers, she replied, and placed the tablet in front of him. On the screen was a photo. Him, sitting at the table by the window at Grant Coffee. Annie was laughing in the photo, her head tilted back. Maya was looking down at her coffee, smiling. Alexander was looking at Maya. The headline read, "Billionaire coffee CEO spotted spending evenings with mystery woman and child." Alexander stared at the screen without speaking. "Who took this?" he asked. "Doesn't matter," Helen said. "What matters is that it's already online. And people are asking questions. Investors read news. Board members read news. Your personal life becomes company business very quickly at your level." Alexander leaned back in his chair. "It's coffee. I own coffee shops. I'm allowed to sit in one." Helen crossed her arms. "You're not just sitting. You're sitting there almost every evening with the same woman and a child who is apparently not yours. Do you know what the internet is saying?" "I can imagine," he said calmly. "They're saying you're secretly dating a single mother. They're saying you're trying to fix your public image. They're saying you're about to get married. They're saying she trapped you. They're saying you rescued her. They're saying a lot of things, Alexander." He looked at the photo again, Annie laughing, Maya smiling, him looking at Maya like he had forgotten the rest of the room existed. "That photo," Helen said more quietly, "does not look like a business meeting." Alexander didn't answer. Helen sighed. "Look, I'm not telling you how to live your life. But I am telling you this, if this becomes a scandal, the board will get nervous. Nervous boards make aggressive decisions." "What kind of aggressive decisions?" he asked. "The kind where they start suggesting the CEO should focus on the company and keep his personal life low risk," she said carefully. Alexander gave a small, humorless smile. "Low risk. That's a nice way to describe a human being." "I'm on your side," Helen said, "but the board is on the side of money, and money doesn't like surprises." That evening, Alexander was late to the cafe for the first time. Maya noticed immediately when she and Annie walked in, and their table by the window was empty. "He's late," Annie said, looking at the door. "He has a job," Maya said. "A very big job. He can't just sit with us every day." "I know," Annie said, "but he usually does." Maya didn't answer. She ordered her coffee and sat down, but something felt different. She hadn't realized how much she had started to expect those quiet conversations until the chair across from her stayed empty. 20 minutes passed. Annie was doing homework, but she kept looking at the door every time it opened. At almost 6, Alexander finally walked in. He looked more tired than usual, his tie slightly loose, his expression more serious. Annie saw him first and waved both arms like she was directing an airplane. "You're late," she said when he reached the table. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." Maya studied his face. "Long day?" "Something like that," he said, sitting down. He looked at Annie's homework, but he wasn't really seeing it. Maya could tell. She had seen that look on doctors after bad shifts, physically present, mentally somewhere else. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. Then he took out his phone and placed it on the table, turning the screen toward her. Maya looked at the photo. Her heart dropped. "Oh," she said softly. Annie leaned over. "Oh, that's us. I look cute." Maya closed her eyes briefly. "Annie." "What?" Annie said. "I do." Alexander almost smiled, but it faded quickly. "It's in the news," he said. "People are asking questions. The board is nervous. My PR team is nervous." Maya looked at the photo again. She saw what other people would see. A rich man, a poor woman, a child that wasn't his, a story people could twist any way they wanted. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong," he replied. "But this could hurt your company," she said. "Your reputation, your investors." He looked at her. "You're not a scandal, Maya. That's not how the world sees it," she said gently. "The world sees a rich man and a woman with nothing, and decides she must want something." Annie looked between them, sensing the change in the air. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Alexander shook his head. "No, not you." But Maya knew he was in trouble. Not the kind you could fix with an apology. The kind that came from powerful people with opinions and money. "You should stop coming," Maya said suddenly. Alexander looked at her. "What?" "You should stop sitting with us," she said. "At least for a while, until this goes away." Annie's face fell. "What? Why?" Maya kept her eyes on Alexander. "Because I don't want to be the reason something in your life breaks. The cafe noise continued around them, but at their table, everything had gone very quiet. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. And what if I don't want to stop? He asked. Maya's voice was very soft when she answered. Then you have to decide if we're worth the trouble. The question stayed on the table between them, heavier than any of the coffee cups. Alexander did not answer Maya's question right away. Then you have to decide if we're worth the trouble. He looked at her, really looked at her, like he was trying to measure something that couldn't be measured in numbers or contracts or market value. Across the table, Annie was very quiet now. Her small hands wrapped around her cup, her eyes moving back and forth between the two adults. She didn't understand board members or investors or headlines, but she understood one thing very clearly. Something was trying to take this away. Alexander finally spoke, his voice calm, but different now. I built my entire life dealing with trouble, he said. Legal trouble, financial trouble, business trouble, men twice my size trying to take what I built. Trouble doesn't scare me. Maya shook her head slightly. This is different. This is the kind of trouble where people don't attack you directly. They attack your name, your reputation. They whisper. They write things. They make stories. And suddenly, you're defending yourself for something that was never wrong to begin with. Alexander didn't deny that, because she was right. I don't want Annie to open the internet one day and see people saying her mom trapped a rich man. Maya continued quietly. I don't want people looking at me like I planned this, like I calculated this, like I saw you and thought you were my way out. Annie looked up immediately. You didn't, she said. You didn't even know he was rich. You thought he was a coffee manager. Maya gave a small, sad smile. I know, baby, but the world doesn't care about the truth. The world cares about stories that sound interesting. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the table. Then maybe it's time we tell the truth before they make up lies. Maya looked at him. What truth? The truth, he said, that a little girl asked a stranger to sit down for 5 minutes because her mother was being pressured into a life she didn't want. And that stranger said yes. And then he kept sitting down because he didn't want to be alone anymore either. Maya felt her throat tighten. That's not a scandal, he continued. That's just 2 tired adults and 2 kids who hate fractions trying to get through the week. Annie raised her hand. I really do hate fractions. Alexander nodded. This is an important part of the story. Maya let out a small breath that was almost a laugh, but her eyes were still worried. You say that like the world is reasonable. Like people will hear that story and understand. I don't need the whole world to understand, Alexander said. I just need the people who matter to understand. And if the people who matter decide I'm bad for business? Maya asked. He held her gaze. Then they'll have to decide whether they want me or just the version of me that makes them comfortable. The way he said it made something in Maya's chest hurt, because she realized what he was really saying. He was already choosing. Annie suddenly slid out of her chair and walked around the table. She climbed onto the chair next to Alexander and leaned slightly toward him like she was about to tell him a secret. Are you in trouble because of us? She asked quietly. Alexander looked at her, at the serious little face that had changed his life with one question. I'm in trouble because people don't like things they can't control, he said. And they definitely can't control you. Annie nodded. That's true. Maya looked at both of them and felt something inside her chest pull in 2 directions at once, hope and fear, both equally strong. You should go, she said softly to Alexander. You have big problems to deal with. Important people to talk to. He didn't move. You are important people. That's not what your board thinks, she said. He gave a small, tired smile. My board also thinks opening a bookstore cafe was a bad idea 10 years ago. Now it's our most profitable division. That's different, Maya said. Is it? He asked. She didn't answer. They sat there for a long moment, the late afternoon light turning orange through the window beside their table. Can I tell you something honest? Maya said finally. I prefer honest, he replied. I am not afraid of being poor, she said. I've been poor before. I know how to survive that. I am afraid of Annie getting attached to you and then one day you disappear because your world is too different from ours. Annie's head snapped toward her. Mom. No, she's right, Alexander said quietly. That's a fair fear. He looked at Annie. Come here, he said gently. She slid a little closer, and he spoke so only she and Maya could hear. I don't make promises I can't keep, he said, and I don't sit at a table unless I plan to come back to it. Annie studied his face very carefully, like she was trying to see if there was any lie hiding there. Okay, she said finally. Because I already put you in the Thanksgiving seating chart. Maya covered her face again. I cannot believe this is my child. Alexander laughed quietly. But then he looked back at Maya, and the laughter faded into something more serious. I don't know what's going to happen with the board, he said. I don't know what the newspapers are going to write, but I do know this: walking away from this table because someone might talk would be the first decision in my life I made out of fear instead of principle. Maya felt tears sting her eyes, and she hated that they did, so she looked down quickly at her coffee. You make it sound simple, she said softly. It's not simple, he said. It's just clear. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one as evening settled over the city. Inside the cafe, 4 cups sat on the table, 4 chairs were filled, and for the first time since the article came out, Alexander realized something very clearly. Some things in life cost money, some things cost reputation, and some things cost courage. The question was not whether this would cost him something. The question was whether he was brave enough to pay for it. The next morning, Alexander arrived at Grant Group headquarters earlier than usual. Boston was still gray with early light, the city not fully awake yet, but the top floors of his building were already bright with artificial light and quiet efficiency. Assistants nodded when he walked past. People moved out of his way. Phones rang softly behind glass walls. This was his world. Clean lines, clear rules, measurable success. But for the first time in many years, he walked into his office feeling like this world was asking him a question he didn't want to answer. Helen Brooks was already waiting inside, a folder in her hand. That's never a good sign, Alexander said, taking off his coat. No, Helen agreed. It's not. She handed him the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, news articles, blog posts, social media posts. The same photo again and again. Alexander, Maya, Annie at the cafe table. Some headlines were neutral. Some were curious. Some were cruel. Billionaire CEO's secret relationship with single mother. Grant Group CEO spotted playing family man. Sources say, woman seen with Grant is a nurse and single mom. Is this a love story or a PR disaster? Alexander closed the folder slowly. I hate the phrase single mother, he said. They always say it like it's a crime. Helen nodded. The board is meeting this afternoon. Unscheduled. That's also never a good sign, he said. They're worried, Helen said. Not because you're committing a crime, not because you're doing something illegal, but because you're doing something unpredictable. Alexander walked to the window and looked down at the city. Cars moving, people walking. Somewhere down there was a small apartment where a nurse was probably trying to sleep after a night shift, and a little girl was probably getting ready for school. Do you think I'm making a mistake? He asked. Helen was quiet for a moment before answering. I think, she said carefully, that this is the first decision I've ever seen you make that has nothing to do with money. That doesn't answer the question, he said. She gave a small smile. No, but it explains why everyone is so nervous. That afternoon, the boardroom felt colder than usual. 8 people sat around the long table, men and women in expensive suits. People who had helped Alexander build Grant Group into what it was. People who trusted him. People who also expected him to protect what they had built together. One of the older board members, Martin Hale, spoke first. Alexander, we'll be direct. The recent media attention this situation is creating concern among investors. It's not a situation, Alexander said calmly. It's my personal life. At your level, Martin replied. There is no such thing as just a personal life. Everything you do reflects on the company. Another board member slid a printed article across the table. They're building a narrative, she said. Rich CEO, poor single mother, secret relationship. It's the kind of story that grows. And when stories grow, stock prices fall. Alexander looked at the paper but didn't touch it. So what exactly are you asking me? He said. Martin folded his hands. We're asking you to be careful. To create some distance. At least publicly. Stop being seen there every evening. Stop giving the media a story they can use. And if I don't? Alexander asked. The room went quiet. Finally, Martin said. Then the board will have to consider whether you're making decisions in the best interest of the company. There it was. Not a threat. Not exactly. But close enough. Alexander leaned back in his chair. I built this company from one store, he said quietly. One store where I worked the counter myself because I couldn't afford to hire anyone. I slept in the office for 2 years. I signed every contract, negotiated every lease, fixed every broken machine myself. I gave this company 20 years of my life. We know that, Martin said. Do you? Alexander asked. Because now you're sitting here telling me where I'm allowed to drink coffee and who I'm allowed to drink it with. No, Martin said calmly. We're telling you that when you are the face of a billion-dollar company, your personal choices can cost thousands of employees their jobs if investors panic. That landed hard, because that was the kind of argument Alexander couldn't ignore. Not reputation, not gossip, but employees, families, people who depended on the company staying strong. What exactly do you want me to do? Alexander asked. Just step back, Martin said. Whatever this is, friendship, relationship, charity, handle it privately. Not in your own cafes where people can photograph you and build stories. Charity. The word echoed in Alexander's head in a way that made his chest tighten. I am not doing charity, he said quietly. I didn't say you were, Martin replied. I said that's how it looks. And perception is what moves markets. The meeting ended with no official decision, but the message was clear. On the way out, Helen walked beside him in silence until they reached his office. That went better than it could have, she said. They think I'm doing charity, Alexander said. They think you're doing something they don't understand, Helen corrected. And people with money don't like not understanding things. Alexander walked into his office and sat down slowly. On his desk was a report he was supposed to review. Numbers, charts, growth projections, but all he could see was a different image. Annie drawing a Thanksgiving seating chart. Maya saying, I don't want to do everything alone anymore. The reflection of 4 people in a cafe window that looked like a family. He picked up his phone and stared at it for a long time. Then he typed a message. Can you come to the cafe today? I might be late again. There's something we need to talk about. Across the city, in a small apartment kitchen, Maya's phone buzzed on the table while she helped Annie with spelling words. She picked it up, read the message, and felt that same quiet fear from the night before return to her chest. Something we need to talk about. Adults only used that sentence when something was about to change. Annie looked up at her. Is it him? Maya nodded. Is it bad? Annie asked. Maya looked at the message again before answering. I don't know yet, she said softly, but I think we're about to find out. Maya almost didn't go that afternoon. She read Alexander's message 3 times while standing in the kitchen, her phone still in her hand. Annie sitting at the table sounding out spelling words under her breath. Something we need to talk about. Those words had a weight to them. Adult words. The kind of words that usually came before bad news, layoffs, breakups, hospital diagnoses, goodbye speeches. Is it him? Annie asked again. Yes, Maya said. Is he in trouble? Annie asked. Maya thought about the photo, the headlines, the way Alexander had looked the night before, calm, but tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. I think, Maya said slowly, his world and our world are starting to crash into each other. Annie frowned. Is that bad? Maya looked at her daughter. Sometimes when big worlds crash into small worlds, the small worlds are the ones that get broken. Annie thought about that very seriously. Then she said, maybe this time the big world should break a little. Maya smiled sadly. Life doesn't usually work like that. But Annie didn't look convinced. That afternoon, the cafe was quieter than usual. A rainy Boston day kept most people moving quickly, instead of sitting by windows with coffee. Maya and Annie sat at their table. Annie did homework, but she kept looking at the door every few minutes. Maya tried to drink her coffee, but it had already gone cold in her hands. Alexander arrived almost 40 minutes late. The moment he walked in, Maya knew something was different. Not because of what he wore or how he walked, but because of the way he looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face before saying something he couldn't take back. I'm sorry I'm late, he said as he sat down. It's okay, Maya said. We just got here. That was a lie, and both of them knew it, but neither of them said anything. Annie looked between them. You both look weird, she said. I don't like it. Alexander managed a small smile. That's fair. Maya folded her hands on the table. What did you want to talk about? He didn't answer right away. He looked at Annie, then back at Maya. Can Annie go pick a cookie? My treat. Annie narrowed her eyes. You're sending me away so you can have a serious conversation. Yes, Alexander said. Annie slid off her chair slowly. I will get a cookie, she said, but I will also be watching from a distance. I have no doubt, he said. When Annie walked to the counter, Alexander looked back at Maya. The board met this morning, he said. Maya nodded slowly. I figured. They want me to stop being seen here, he said. They want me to create distance. They said it's bad for the company, bad for investors, bad for the brand. Maya felt like someone had quietly taken all the air out of the room, but she kept her face calm. That makes sense, she said softly. He looked at her. Does it? Yes, she said. You have a big life, Alexander. A lot of people depend on you. Employees, investors, families. I understand why they don't want you in the news for this. This, he repeated. This situation, she said gently. A billionaire and a nurse and a kid who isn't his. People like stories like that, but not always in a kind way. Alexander leaned forward slightly. It's not a situation to me. Maya looked at him, and that made this harder, not easier. It's not a situation to me either, she said quietly. That's why this is scary. He didn't look away from her. They didn't tell me to stop seeing you, he said. They told me to stop being seen with you. Maya gave a small, sad smile. That's worse. I know, he said. She looked down at the table, tracing a small circle on the wood with her finger. So this is the part where we start acting like strangers in public, she said. Where you come in and sit on the other side of the cafe and we pretend we don't know each other. The idea clearly hurt her to say, but she said it anyway. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. I've spent my whole life building things, he said finally. Buildings, stores, companies, systems, everything in my life, I built on purpose, carefully, strategically. Maya listened without interrupting. But this, he said, looking at her. I didn't plan. I didn't build this. Annie did. With one question and a very risky business proposal. Despite everything, Maya smiled a little. And now, he continued, I'm sitting in a boardroom full of people telling me to walk away from the only part of my day that actually feels like my life. Maya felt her eyes sting, and she hated that they did. You wouldn't be walking away from your life, she said softly. You'd be protecting it. He shook his head. No. I'd be protecting my company. That's not the same thing. Annie returned at that moment, holding a cookie and watching both of them very carefully. She climbed back into her chair but didn't start eating. So, she said, is this the part where the story gets sad? Maya closed her eyes briefly. Alexander looked at Annie and then at Maya. That depends, he said quietly, on what your mom and I decide to do next. Annie held the cookie in both hands. Well, she said, I think you should both be brave. Because most adults are cowards, and then they're sad later. Maya looked at her. Annie. What? Annie said. It's true. Alexander leaned back in his chair and looked at both of them, this woman who was trying to push him away to protect him, and this child who was trying to push them together because she understood something simple that adults complicated. I have enough money to last 3 lifetimes, he said quietly. I have buildings, companies, investments. I have more money than I will ever be able to spend. But for a very long time, I have been eating dinner at a table where half the chairs were empty. Maya didn't move, and I realized something a few weeks ago, he continued. Money can buy almost anything, but it cannot buy someone who wants you to sit at their table. That has to be given. And you and Annie, you gave me a chair at your table, without even knowing who I was. Annie blinked. That's because you bought the coffee. Alexander smiled a little. That too. Then he looked at Maya again, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. So the question isn't whether this will cost me something, he said. It will. The question is whether I'm willing to lose something big to keep something that matters more. Maya felt a tear slide down before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, but he had already seen it. "Alexander," she said softly, "I don't want to be the reason you lose your world." He shook his head gently. "You're not taking my world away, Maya. You're reminding me there's supposed to be more than one." When Annie fell asleep at the table that evening, her head slowly sliding down onto her folded arms next to her unfinished homework, neither Maya nor Alexander spoke for a while. The cafe was quieter now. The evening crowd had thinned, and the lights reflected softly on the window beside them. Outside, Boston traffic moved in long lines of red and white lights, people going home to dinners, to families, to empty apartments, to lives that probably felt very different from the small, fragile world at this table. Maya gently brushed Annie's hair away from her face. "She does this when she feels safe," Maya said quietly. "Falls asleep anywhere." Alexander looked at the little girl sleeping between them. "Lucas used to do that when he was younger," he said. "He'd fall asleep on the couch while I was still working. I used to carry him to bed and think, I'll slow down next year. I'll work less next year." And then next year came and I was still busy. Maya looked at him. "You were building something." "I was," he said, "but I missed a lot while I was building it." They sat in silence again, the kind of silence that only happens when two people are thinking about the same thing but from different directions. "After my wife died," Alexander said slowly, "people kept telling me I was lucky I could afford help. A nanny, a housekeeper, tutors. They said money would make it easier." "Did it?" Maya asked. "It made things more efficient," he said, "but it didn't make them less lonely." Maya felt that sentence in her chest. "I don't want a life that is just efficient," he continued. "I had that. It's very quiet, very clean, very empty." Maya looked down at Annie again, then back at Alexander. "My life is the opposite of efficient," she said with a small smile. "Everything is loud and messy and late and expensive." Alexander smiled a little. "It's also very alive." Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she just looked at him, and for the first time she didn't look away quickly. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. Alexander leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Now I make a decision." "A decision about what?" Maya asked, even though she already knew. "About what kind of life I want to live," he said. "The one that looks perfect on paper, or the one that feels right when I sit down at the end of the day." Maya's voice was very quiet when she spoke again. "Those two things don't usually match." "I know," he said. She studied his face, trying to see if he really understood what this could cost him. "If you choose us," she said, "people will say I planned this. They will say I saw a rich man and found a way into his life. They will say Annie is the reason you feel sorry for me." Alexander shook his head. "People who want simple stories will always invent them. But that doesn't make them true." "But it still hurts," Maya said. "Yes," he said, "it does." Annie shifted in her sleep and leaned slightly against Maya's arm. Maya wrapped an arm around her without thinking. Alexander watched that small movement and felt something settle in his chest, like a decision that had been forming for weeks had finally reached the surface. "I spent 20 years building a company," he said. "I spent 10 years being a husband. I've spent the last 5 years being a father and a businessman and a man who eats dinner alone most nights." Maya listened very carefully. "And a few weeks ago," he continued, "a little girl walked up to me and said, 'Can you sit with my mom for a while?' And I thought it would be 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes." Maya smiled faintly. "It's been more than 5 minutes." "Yes," he said, "it has." He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but steady. "I don't know what this becomes, Maya. I don't know the Zaya. I don't know what it looks like a year from now, but I know that when I don't see you for a day, the day feels wrong. And when I do see you, the day feels like my life again, not just my schedule." Maya felt tears fill her eyes again, but this time she didn't look away. "I am not asking you for an answer tonight," he said. "I am not asking you to marry me. I am not asking you to change your life overnight. I am just asking if you're willing to see where this goes, even if it's hard, even if people talk, even if my board hates me for a while." Maya let out a shaky breath. "You make it sound very simple." "It's not simple," he said, "but some things are still worth doing even when they're not simple." She looked at him for a long moment, then down at Annie, then back at him again. "I have spent so many years just trying to survive," she said quietly. Pay rent. Raise Annie. Keep my job. Keep everyone else happy. I don't even remember the last time I made a decision just because it might make me happy. Alexander didn't interrupt. And that scares me, she said. Because if I choose this, I'm not just risking my heart. I'm risking hers too. She gently touched Annie's hair. Alexander nodded. I know. That's why I'm not asking for a promise. I'm asking for a chance. And I'm promising that I won't disappear one day and pretend this was nothing. Maya searched his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for any sign that he might walk away when things got difficult. She didn't see it. What about Lucas? She asked quietly. This isn't just about us. It's about him too. Alexander smiled slightly. Lucas already asked if you were my girlfriend. Maya groaned softly. Of course he did. And he said Annie is intense but funny, which is the highest compliment he gives anyone. Alexander added. Maya laughed through her tears. She is intense. They sat there, both smiling a little now, Annie asleep between them like a small bridge that had somehow connected two completely different worlds. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, time felt like it had slowed down just for this table. Finally, Maya said very softly, Okay. Alexander didn't move. Okay? He repeated. Okay, she said again. We can see where this goes. Slowly, carefully, but honestly. For the first time that day, Alexander felt like he could breathe fully. Slowly, carefully, honestly, he said. I can do that. Annie stirred slightly, half awake, and mumbled, Did I miss anything? Maya kissed the top of her head. No, baby, she said softly. You started it. You didn't miss it. Annie smiled in her sleep, her head still resting against her mother's arm. Alexander looked at both of them and realized that somewhere between a business meeting, a newspaper headline, a tired nurse, and a brave little girl, his life had quietly changed direction, and for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid of where it was going. This story reminds us that life is not only about money, status, or what looks safe on paper. Sometimes, the most important things in life are very small and very quiet. A cup of coffee, a seat at the table, someone who listens when you are tired, and someone who doesn't let you face the world alone. The story teaches us that real love does not come from rescue, pity, or convenience, but from respect, kindness, and choosing each other when things become difficult. It also reminds us that children often see the truth more clearly than adults. That being brave is sometimes more important than being safe. And that a happy life is not built by wealth, but by the people who sit at your table and stay. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real, and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.